The spoon hit the cereal bowl so hard it shivered against the countertop. Ceramic against formica, sharp and thin, a little percussion that woke something in me. I smelled instant coffee, black bitter, the kind my dad would grimace at and call nostalgic, and Brooke's perfect nails clicked on the eviction notice like metronome ticks, each tap a small accusation. Her eyes were blue and calm like the sea on a postcard, and she smiled a patient smile that had practiced concern. I said it before the coffee went cold and before my jaw stopped buzzing. You can have 12 hours, Brooke. She slid the paper across at 7:22 a.m., the print clinical and void of mercy, served like a legal comeuppance rather than a conversation. The notice said I had 24 days to leave. The words looked like a dare in that morning light, black on white and impossible to soften. My hand curled around the mug. The coffee burned my fingers a shade of too hot that made me keep hold of it like proof that I was awake, still there. She laughed, one of those little practiced laughs that dissolved questions. And William kept looking at me with that guilty, slow compassion of a man who thinks love is silence. The cruelties aren't cinematic in the beginning. They're small and domestic, like the way someone poisons soup by tightening the salt. There was the time I dumped my laundry basket into the washer and pulled out a mound of used coffee grounds tangled in my socks and fitted boxers, damp and clinging like some messy apology. Brooke in her beige cardigan said, "Oh heavens, must have fallen in," with airbrushed concern, and William patted my shoulder, eyes drifting away. I kept the sock with grounds in the back of my drawer for 3 weeks, because I wanted to remember the smell when I forgot everything else. The hoodie I'd had since college, the one I slept in through late shifts and bad breakups, came out of the dryer with the collar chewed to bits. My first thought was mice. My second was Brooke's thin smile when I held it up and asked what had happened. She said she'd air-dried everything for me because she didn't want things shrinking, and William said, "It's just a sweater, Jace, we'll get you another." Like I was a child who could be consoled with money or new fabric. But it wasn't money, it was the way she'd taken and ruined something I used like armor, and offered me a bandage as a solution. The shampoo was the worst of all, the one that made me tremble remembering the smell and the texture. I thought she'd swapped bottles by accident, because who switches shampoo for something industrial, right? I ran the lather and felt my hands stick together like two cards glued by a reckless kid. My scalp screamed as if someone had poured glue through the T of my head. It smelled like solvent and lemon, and for a terrifying hour I could feel my hair pulling when I brushed, little tufts clinging to the comb like confessions. I almost lost an inch of my own hair before I realized it wasn't my clumsy hands or heredity. Someone had switched the label. I found the empty tube under the sink later, sticky and cruel, and when I asked her she said, "Oh my God, Jace, how could I be so clumsy?" As if clumsiness explains chemical burns. She's always June Cleaver perfect around my father, warm hands on his knee, cookies ready at 4, a forehead kiss that looks like penance. At 6:47 p.m. she'll appear with soup like it's a sign of moral fiber, and William will close his eyes and say thank you, as if her domestic theater cures everything. She plays concern like a flute, taking in my father's soft confessions and translating them into schedules, pills, insurance calls. He dies for the little courtesies, he thrives on small-heartedness. I thrive on his glance, the one that used to be mine. I am tired of being the boy who takes blame for the houseplants that die inexplicably, the milk that goes sour overnight, the dishes that seem to disappear. I'm used to apologizing first and last, practiced in walking on floorboards of someone else's mood. I want, more than anything, for my father to look at me and know the man he raised, not the ghost he comforts with soft hands. I want his mouth to shape my name without the pity that robs it. The notice has a timestamp in the corner, served at 7:22 a.m., and a sterile clause about possession being contested if I refuse. The paper smells faintly of ink and Brooke's perfume, a floral accusation. She arranges her face into hurt like a costume, as if she's chosen to be the reasonable one. I stack the mug down a little harder than I should and say it again, because words are what stop people from doing stupid, cruel things. You want me out in 24 days, fine. I'll give you 12 hours. I stand there, coffee gone cold, and the house keeps pretending everything is normal like a stage set with the lights already up. Brooke is already switching into nurse mode when the front door opens at 5:15 p.m. and William shuffles in with his cane tapping the tile. The moment he crosses the threshold, her shoulders soften, the perfume changes. Now it's warm vanilla and something green that smells like clean towels. And she appears at his elbow with a dish towel in one hand and a plate of buttery cookies in the other, as if she's been waiting on cue. She straightens his cardigan with that practiced touch and says, "How was your day, love?" And I watch him soften the way bread does under a warm hand. It is an act perfected until it hurts. She plays to him like an actress playing his favorite role, and I am invisible on the sidelines until I make noise. She volunteers to help me with my laundry the week before my birthday and comes back 3 days later with my varsity sweater shrunken at the cuffs. the fabric puckered and wrong against my wrists. When I hold it up smelling faintly of her floral detergent, she widens her eyes with genuine alarm and says, "Oh, Jason, I'm so sorry. I must have put it in a hot cycle by accident." She never mentions having done it with the look of someone who did not intend harm. She insists on plausible mistakes the way some people insist on breathing. Dinner spills are another kind of theater. At 7:05 p.m. one night, I'm stacking plates at the stove and the whole dinner slides off the counter in a clumsy wave, sauce splattering down the cabinets. Brooke stands in the doorway and watches the ruin like a referee, then looks at me and says, "I didn't see you there, honey," as if visibility matters. The sauce hardens like sun on a window, the air smells like burnt garlic and shame. William looks between us with a sleepy worry and asks, "Are you being dramatic, Jace?" His voice is soft with trust, the kind you can't argue with because it's wrapped in love. That question cuts cleaner than insults because it means my father chooses the reality Brooke sells. Those long nights are what keep me tethered. I sit in the den at 10:30 p.m. most nights and watch him read from the same thin paperback he's read a dozen times. He hums a low country song that used to be our signal when I came home late in high school. That hum is home. Once he laughed and shoved popcorn at me with his thumb when the TV cracked a joke, and I felt like a son again. Brooke sits in the doorway with a knitted blanket over her knees and says something about his cholesterol, and he gives her that sigh that means he loves her for making lists and asking questions. He wants to be taken care of. He needs someone who will fold the world into manageable pieces. She's been refining this for years. Her performances are small and steady like tap shoes worn thin to perfect sound. She will bring me tea at 8:10 a.m. and then ask gently, "Are you sleeping enough?" Like she's worried about my wellness while she quietly shifts the mantle. One afternoon when I come through the living room, the frame with me and my mother is gone like someone took the last breath out of the room. Brooke says with measured sweetness, "Oh, I moved those to the closet, they were under dust. I put them with the old things." She points to a closet labeled "old things" and closes the door with that soft finality that signals done. I find the photo 2 days later, shoved behind holiday placemats and boxes, the glass clouded, my mother smiling like a memory someone tried to hide. Handling that picture smells like dust and denial. When I confront Brooke later in the kitchen, she looks at me with that same soft panic and says, "I thought you wanted them out of the way, hun." She wrings her hands like a woman helping a friend. She frames erasure as help. She builds isolation like a mason layer by small layer, insinuating that I am unstable because I care too much, negligent because I get frustrated, and selfish because I want my father whole instead of folded into her care plan. It's slow and methodical, and William is tired. His illness takes the rough edges off his suspicion and polishes her explanations into truth. I keep my jaw tight and my hands steady, making plans not because I want war but because I want the truth in the same room where my father hums that old song. I tell myself the stage will come down, that the lights will go dark, and that when they do I will step forward and speak into the silence he gives me. The doctor's voice drops like a weight and the room tilts. Fluorescent lights hum at 3:38 p.m. and the antiseptic smell is suddenly louder than anything else. Dr. Evans says the words like a report, stage 3 colon cancer, and William's hand goes to his mouth the way cardboard folds, small and human. Brooke's face is a study in soft panic for 3 seconds. Then her breath steadies and she's the woman with a plan, the one who calls the insurance line and schedules tests before the words have finished settling into my chest. I watch him blink as if he's trying to read a different line on the page, and I feel that old animal panic where the world narrows to the size of the person you love. She sees not so much illness as an opening. The moment the doctor leaves and the hospital curtain flutters down, she's all checklists and cookies, talking about diet and rest like it's an itinerary. At 10:12 a.m. the next morning, she calls the school and persuades my father that the stress of my high school graduation will set him back, and William, exhausted and wanting to be careful, agrees. I stand in my cap and gown beneath the buzzing auditorium lights at 2:10 p.m., fluorescent, unforgiving, the air tasting like old carpet and cheap flowers, and the principal calls my name. The seat next to the aisle is empty. The crowd hums like a distant sea, and my chest hammers into the same old place where anger and need live. While I stand there alone, Brooke posts a set of photos from a quiet, romantic weekend at Sonoma Ridge, 3 smiling images of her and my father on a porch with wine. The caption reads, "Quality time with my love, taking care of him, blessed red heart tread," and she tags his name. The story flashes at 11:03 p.m. with heart emojis and a slow, filtered video of them walking hand in hand through grapevines. The timestamp is tiny but cruel. I screenshot it because I can't trust my eyes. The weekend she convinces him to miss his son's graduation becomes content, love theater. a public record that feeds pity and erases absence. Then comes the college letter, folded like a promise in my hands, a partial scholarship from Boston College that smells of possibility. The paper says the scholarship covers $8,500 a year toward tuition, not everything, but enough to make the school breathe like a door opening. I feel that sharp electric joy, the sort that makes your throat tighten with hope, and I picture myself leaving this house for something that isn't a waiting room. I tell Brooke, voice shaking, and she tilts her head, smiles a practiced small smile and says, "Let's look at our finances together, honey." She spreads bank statements across the kitchen island like a lawyer building a case, and William sits with his cane at 6:05 p.m. nodding while she talks numbers. She points at columns and lines with a pen, framing me as naive and trusting. "You haven't seen the outgoings, Jason," she says softly. "These medical bills are going to get worse." She suggests community college as a sensible alternative, cheap and local, because we need you around here right now. The words are patient, reasonable, arranged so that love sounds like a ledger. All the while, her spending during the same week builds a map of contradiction. A delivery notification pops up at 4:44 p.m. with 2 brand bags charged to the family card, $1,430 each, ordered from a boutique site under her email. A confirmation for recurring spa treatments lands at 9:07 a.m., $145 a session, scheduled every Friday for the next 2 months under stress management. Another package sits in the foyer at 1:20 p.m., designer shoes with a $720 tag visible through the shipping label, left there like proof of normalcy. She files each receipt into a folder labeled household, and when William asks about costs, she calls it self-care, framing indulgence as therapy, and making it sound like a necessity for keeping him calm. She leans on his sympathy like a hand on a railing. At dinner, she whispers things that sound sensible. We can't overextend. Faith and caution are gifts, and William, who is tired of fighting and terrified of being wrong about not being careful, nods and leaves the decisions to her. She rearranges our future into a version where my dreams are luxuries and his comfort is priority, and she writes the narrative into the ledger in soft cursive. It feels like being boxed in by warm hands. I watch this pattern until the newness of shock turns into a steady, cold anger. She takes his fear and turns it into an instrument to clip my wings, and she does it with the smiles and cookies that make everyone else forgive the shape of her hand. I don't want to be a son who fights his father's comfort, but I also am not willing to let illness be used as leverage to shrink my life. The grief is immediate, so is the decision forming under it. Something has to give. They wheel him into Lakeside Haven Hospice at 4:18 p.m. and the hallway feels like a throat narrow, with the fluorescent lights buzzing like a swarm of flies. Brooke plants herself in the doorway like a gatekeeper, an iPad glowing in her hands with family photos scrolling on loop, the sound off but the smiles loud. The smell of antiseptic hits me first, sharp and cold, and then the warmth of his blanket. She presses a hand to his arm and pets him the way someone pats a sleeping animal, slow and practiced, while I stand next to the window watching the rain make thin gray tracks on the glass. Brooke announces to the nurse that she's the primary caregiver and medical proxy at 4:32 p.m. with that even voice that makes things sound decided and inevitable. The staff nod politely and hand her a clipboard. She signs like a woman signing the last page of a play she's already memorized. The wall clock over the nurse's station ticks at 4:36 p.m. and I can hear every second this room gives away. The hum of the HVAC, the scrape of a cart in the corridor, the low murmur of other families, everything compresses into the space between heartbeat and breath. She sets visitation rules like she's setting tableware, 20 minutes every third day, scheduled through her. Her tone is honey and steel at once. She spends long afternoons in his room with friends who laugh too loudly in the hall while I stand by the vending machine biting the wax cup of cold coffee. At 2:22 p.m. I watch them push flowers through the doorway and talk like a chorus, the voices pitching high over a subject they do not tend to. Brooke closes the curtain when she wants privacy and leaves the hallway to fill with other people's noise. When I ask about a longer visit, she smiles and says, "You'll get your time." Right now he needs calm, like calm is a currency she administers from a box. Her phone buzzes, the iPad lighting up with another photo. She scrolls, replies with a heart, and walks back in like nothing happened. The nights are worse, the hours thin and desperate. I sleep in a vinyl chair at the bedside because this is the only room that smells faintly like the home he used to keep. My cheek presses into that cheap fabric and my hand finds his, small and warm and brittle against mine. At 1:45 in the morning, 2 security guards appear at the foot of the bed, the moonlight making them stark, and a woman's hushed voice calls, "He's being disruptive." Brooke is in the corridor and says it softly as if she's apologizing for a noise. The guards' shoes tap against tile as they walk me out. The first one holds a flashlight that smells faintly like oil and rubber. I leave my father with my fingers still in his, and I go out into the rain like a thief. In the room, she leans over him with piles of paper at 6:12 p.m., stacked legal forms with crisp corners that speak of finality. Her fingers steady his pen and guide it across the line while his eyes blink in and out of focus like a broken lamp. I ask her what he is signing and she says with that soft panic, "Oh baby, it's boring adult stuff, advanced directives, power of attorney." She speaks like a woman tucking horrors into a polite envelope. The pen scrapes across the paper and each signature is a small removal, a quiet recharting of who will decide who he becomes. Dr. Elena Garcia comes in at 3:05 p.m. the next day with a soft knock and a folder pressed to her chest. She's steady and direct in a room full of polite improvisers. She talks to my father in a low voice about comfort and symptoms, about dignity in language that means nothing about money. She looks at me once like she sees me and then looks away, the way people do when they want to present options without making enemies. I note her name on the chart, Dr. Elena Garcia, and the way she pauses over certain sentences, underlining words I can't yet read as anything but hope. The forms Brooke feeds him would quietly give her power, the proxy, the medical decisions, control of visitation, the access to the bills. It feels like watching someone rearrange the furniture in a house while the owners sleep. I stand there and see the way she scaffolds control with sweet phrases and legal boxes, each checkbox another small erasure. She couches change in care and calls it protection. The smell of the ink on those papers is like the smell of permission. I feel small, crowded out, and furious, but fury is a warm thing compared to the cold futility churning in my belly. If she's building a room around him to keep me out, then the only honest response is to learn the walls and the joints. I will not let this go quiet and polite. Something will snap not to humiliate her, but to rescue him and myself from a life edited by somebody else's idea of tenderness. I hold that promise like a light under my ribs. I'm still smelling the funeral on my suit when Brooke breezes into the kitchen like she's auditioning for a part in someone else's life, pearls around her neck that aren't mine anymore. The pearls click like a metronome as she slides a typed eviction notice across the antique table at 8:12 in the morning, the paper whispering against wood in a sound that feels like a verdict. She says calm and bright that the house belongs to us now and that I have 27 days to leave, like a landlord announcing a deadline. She jangles the keys in her hand, heavy and brass, and smiles the way a jailer smiles for a parade. I press my palm flat to the table to feel its grain, breathe in the scent of lilies and stale incense from the wake, and I say, cold and even, we'll see about that. She keeps talking as if possession exists because she says it aloud, soft words about making the place comfortable for William, about estate plans that are tidy and simple. She speaks in that syrupy tone she uses when she wants people to think she's comforting the world. I watch her fingernails catch the light on those pearls, and I remember the small cruelties that made up the architecture of our life, thread by thread, and I feel very far from being surprised. The house looks different with her speech on it, as if the rooms learn to shift when she walks through, and the eviction paper sits like a new piece of furniture no one asked for. I go upstairs to the room where I kept my things, where a shoebox of keepsakes lives under an old varsity jacket, the box with ticket stubs and a press-on guitar pick my mother liked to keep. I remember suddenly, with the precise pain of an old secret, a manila envelope my father gave me years before, hands worrying a pen, voice low. "Only if necessary, son." I find the shoebox and the envelope is there on top, labeled in big block letters that I read twice because the label feels like a dare Jason, open only if absolutely necessary. My hands are shaking when I peel the tape, the paper rough and familiar like a map. Inside are 3 documents folded like cards and a short letter in my dad's slanted handwriting, ink a little smudged where he rushed. The first is an irrevocable trust deed dated 3 years earlier, the kind of airtight paper lawyers like to call final. It names me as the sole beneficiary of the house and lists the property by legal description, the stamped seal so official it smells faintly of the courthouse. The second is a prenuptial agreement Brooke signed at the altar months into their marriage. It's blunt and precise, limiting her claim to the items she brought into the marriage plus one mid-size sedan identified by VIN, the number printed clear as a barcode. The third is a notarized statement from Dr. Allen, his name in block letters on the top, confirming William was of sound mind, lucid and free from duress when he signed the trust. The notary stamp cross-checks everything like someone who anticipated argument. The letter is short and it carries my father's gravel and grace at once. He writes that he documented Brooke's patterns, the little things that didn't line up, the soft erasures, and that he prepared protections because he trusted me and feared her ambition. He tells me not to let the house become a story someone else edits without telling us. His handwriting tightens at the end. "I wanted you to have what we had, Jace. If it gets necessary, use this. I love you." There's no melodrama in the words, only the clean, sharp kind of care that settles like armor. I sit on the kitchen floor with the envelope open and the grief smelling like iron in my nose, and the emotion that comes first is a stunned small gratitude that blooms into something like triumph. It's a bitter, righteous relief, proof he anticipated more than death, proof he saw what I was seeing and acted to protect me. I feel his hands in that envelope, a quiet strategy tucked under a father's steady fear. I call Harper Locksmith at 9:35 a.m., my voice a calm I don't feel, and book a change of locks for the afternoon. The woman on the line asks my address and says she'll have a tech there by 3, efficient and practical like she knows whose side the hinges take. I hang up and the house suddenly tastes different, not hostile but honest. My father expected this kind of fight and left me the tools. That knowledge sits in me like a light. I'm not here to humiliate Brooke or to gloat. I'm here to reclaim a life my father trusted me with, and I will move through every legal box and locked door if I have to. She's at the kitchen table when I come down, an iPad open to real estate listings, and my mother's teacup in her hand like a prop she's borrowed to play bereaved widow. The cup smells faintly of bergamot and old sugar, and her thumb taps the glass countertop while she scrolls with the other hand, thumbnails painted the exact polite pink she thinks signals softness. I set the deed down in front of her like a gauntlet at 9:08 a.m., the paper heavy and official, the courthouse stamp still visible at the corner. She looks up, and for a beat the smug calm is still there. Then the lines in her face shift the way a mask does when the wind takes it. I tell her, steady and flat, the house has been in an irrevocable trust for 3 years. Dad named me sole beneficiary. You have no legal claim beyond what's in your prenup. I keep my voice low because shouting makes people theater again, and I don't want to hand her another scene. Her eyes flick over the legal language, the legal description of the property, and then to the line where my name is written clear as a bell. For the first time in years, something like panic washes her face. Instead of the practiced pity, she saves for everyone else. She reads and the face crumples in 2 stages, smug to panicked, and then she reaches for theatrics like she's been rehearsing them. You can't do this, she says at first, small and breathless as if the paper were a lie. Then the voice grows, I will contest it. I'll hire the best lawyers in the city. You don't know what you're doing. She claws for legal leverage as if words alone could pull property lines apart. I don't argue the law with her. I slide Dr. Allen's notarized statement across the table like a silence. The stamp, the signature, the clear line that reads he confirmed my father was of sound mind when he signed everything is an answer that smells faintly of ink and courthouse floors. Her reaction spills out in waves. First a wet performative sob that makes the air sticky with fake mourning, hands pressing at her throat, shoulders shaking in that calibrated way meant to make people look away. She pivots to rage so quickly it looks like a show, loud and gleaming, yelling about family and devotion and Christian charity like she's reading from a sermon she wrote herself. How dare you, she hisses between words. I cared for him, you're tearing family apart. The words hit the table like dishes, and a fork rattles from a junk drawer she slams closed. I call Harper Locksmith back at 9:35 a.m. to confirm the emergency rekey. The woman answers like she knows the beat of these days. I hear the soft clack of orders in the background. We'll be there with a tech at 3:15, she says, and I tell her the driver needs to be ready to change 2 locks and program a keypad. I tell Brooke the time, and my voice is calm as a clock. I expect you gone by 8:20 tonight, I say plainly because there's no poetry left in threats, only the factual hours of a day. She tries every emotional ploy she's used for years, laying on pity and rage in equal measure, grasping for neighbors and God and whatever jury she can conjure. I refuse each one like closing a door. She packs fast 2 designer suitcases and 1 oversized tote with a luxury logo stamped on it. Each piece looks expensive enough to have its own life. The receipts flutter like paper birds. I watch the tags and know the numbers in my head. Roughly $1,250 a bag, a show of wealth that feels poor against a legal deed. At 8:10 p.m. I walk her out to the driveway with the suitcases like an escort rather than a courtroom bailiff. Neighbors have their windows open like small theaters, silhouettes leaning forward. Mrs. Keene from across the hall whispers through her slightly cracked window, did he really have it in writing? And the simple surprise in her voice lands like a small victory. Brooke screams threats, I'll take you to court, Jason, you'll regret this. But the sound bounces off the quiet yards, more fury than power. I stand there with my hands empty except for the knowledge that my father planned for this, that the law and love both back me up. I don't shout or gloat. I keep my face steady while the last of her suitcases slides into the car and the engine starts, and the house, for the first time in a long while, feels like the space he intended it to be. The suitcases clatter like a percussion section and the car idles low in the driveway, metal and perfume, and a burst of exhaust mixing with cut grass. Brooke slams the back door, pearls chiming, and shouts over the engine with a voice all venom and rehearsed hurt. "You'll regret this, Jason. I'll ruin you, lawyers, friends, everything. You'll be the callous son in every version of this story." She slams the driver's door and the sound bangs through the front yard like a gavel. The tires spin for a beat on the gravel and she peels away in a streak. The taillights a blink of red, the car swallowing her anger and the clink of 1,000 small claims in one muffled roar. I stay on the porch watching until the car light disappears around the corner and the dust settles in the air like a film. The sound of her voice fades into the hum of the street, replaced by the closer, slow noises of home, the distant lawnmower 2 houses down, a dog barking like a metronome, the neighbor's screen door squeak. The driveway holds her suitcases like artifacts, the tags fluttering, the grass still smells like cut summer and the night's damp. My hands are cold but steady. I pick up the eviction notice she handed me the morning after the funeral, the one that was supposed to make me leave, and carry it inside like a relic. I slip it into a simple frame I find in the study drawer, something plain and unadorned, and set it on the shelf of my home office where I do the quiet, honest parts of living. The framed notice looks ridiculous against the open legal books and a coffee mug with a chip in the lip, like a trophy that doesn't need gold leaf. I stand back and feel a small, private satisfaction that isn't about triumph over her. It's about marking the moment her claim dissolved in the face of what was true. It is a reminder that truth, when prepared for in advance, is its own kind of force. The cost of it sits heavy in my chest. There is the hollow ache of losing my father, the low, raw place that wakes up every morning with me. Grief is a room you cannot leave, its furniture and sound and a chair that never empties entirely. Layered on top of that is the odd, sharp relief that comes with finding what he left me, legal paper with a seal, a notary's hand, a signature that said he cared enough to plan for the worst. The relief tastes like cold metal and something sweet. And there is horror, too. The horror that he expected cruelty from the person he invited in, that he felt he had to armor his last wishes with ink. I walk into the living room and take down my mother's photo from the closet where Brooke hid it, dust lifting like tiny constellations when I pull the frame free. Her face is the same in the picture, soft, hair in a loose braid, laughing like a thing you can almost call back if you could only be loud enough. I wipe the glass with the corner of my shirt and rehang it above the mantel where it belongs. The portrait looks right there, not hidden, not shuffled into old things. I fold William's letter, his short, blunt sentences that saved me, into my wallet. The paper is soft at the creases, his ink smudged where his hands trembled the day he wrote it, and carrying it feels like keeping a compass in my pocket. Neighbors come and go in the small way houses trade gossip and grief. Mrs. Keene leans out at the window with her hand cupped at her mouth and says quietly, "He did the right thing, he really did." Her cousin 2 doors down gives a small nod and says, "Good for him." The voices are low and steady, not the raucous chorus Brooke threatened, but the quiet approval of people who have watched the small, obvious cruelty build over years and are relieved it stopped. Brooke tries to circulate the threats like a handbill, texts, a handful of calls, a social post designed to shape a story. But every time she mentions contesting the trust, someone points to a copy of the deed and the notarized statement and the words fall flat. Her threats look thinner against stamped signatures and a deed that won't be rewritten by volume or fury. It's not a moment of blazing justice or public humiliation. It is quieter, paperwork being better than performance, steadier hands replacing theater. I feel gratitude toward my father that is complicated and deep, grateful because he guarded what we had and because he understood the kind of person Brooke could be. He kept his love private and his protection absolute. The house is still mine now in law and in the slow, practical ways that make a life livable. My keys work. My mother's photo hangs where I can see it, and the framed eviction notice sits as a reminder of a bargain kept. I sit on the edge of the porch step when the light is soft, palms on my knees, and I let the quiet settle. It's a hard-won piece carved out of grief and paper and stubborn love. I have the house back not because I broke her, but because my father prepared for me. That feels like mercy and like an inheritance both at once. At 3:15 p.m. the locksmith finished changing the locks and the last click was a small, decisive sound in the hall. I stood with the installer while he tightened the last screw, smelling metal and a faint trace of machine oil, as if the house itself exhaled a little freedom. I taped a small sign to the front door that read private in block letters, simple paper, blue painter's tape at the corners, and it looked ridiculous and honest both at once. The sign was not a taunt, it was a quiet line drawn in the dust. The first days after felt thin and full. I rehung my mother's photo over the mantel with a steady hand and the glass caught the late light like a small altar. I sorted boxes in the attic that Brooke had called junk when she moved things out of sight, A stack of my father's faded work shirts, a brass ice cream scoop my mother liked, a pile of old records with cracked sleeves that smelled faintly of cedar. I made a small shelf by the window where I placed the items she'd dismissed: my mother's teacup, my father's worn baseball cap, a small wooden soldier my grandmother carved. Each object was heavy with memory and light with meaning, and setting them together felt like reclaiming a language that had been quietly stolen. I refused to make a show of it. There would be no social posts, no public gloating, no invitations to watch a downfall. I did not put the framed eviction notice online or blast her name into town. The frame went on a small wall in my home office where I could see it without pretending it was anything more than a record of what had happened. It was an honest reminder, a testament to planning, and a caution against letting grief be rewritten by someone else's script. Work returned slowly, emails stacking like small waves on my desk, and the smell of copier toner becoming ordinary again. Returning to the day job was one of the sober rituals of normal life. It grounded me in places that had nothing to do with the house and everything to do with being a man who kept showing up. I set clearer boundaries with family and with friends, answering calls on my terms and telling people who mattered how they could help without deciding for me. That steadiness mattered more than any dramatic public victory. One slow afternoon, I bumped into Dr. Elena Garcia at the coffee shop on Elm, the place with chipped mugs and a barista who knew my order. She was waiting for a cappuccino and held a paper cup with both hands like it was a small comfort. When I approached, she looked up, the same steady, kind face from Lakeside Haven Hospice, and she nodded as if she had something to say that didn't need a stage. She told me quietly that William had been lucid and resolved when he set the trust in place, and that he had deliberately asked her to write a notarized statement confirming his clarity. Her tone was low and factual, as if she had been delivering good news sandwiched between clinical records and compassion. Hearing it from her, someone outside my family with no stake in drama, felt like the final seal on what my father had done. Neighbors kept their distance, but their eyes stayed kind. Mrs. Keene brought over a casserole without comment and set it on the counter like a small peace offering. People whispered in low, approving tones when they saw the deed framed inside the house, but the whispers never became spectacle. Brooke circulated threats for a while, cold emails, and one angry phone call, but the legal papers held their shape and the threats dissolved into noise. There was no grand courtroom scene, no public collapse. There was simply the steady fact of paperwork and truth standing where performance had been offered. At night, I fold William's letter and slide it back into my wallet before I turn out the light. I keep the envelope that held the trust in an old shoebox under the bed because some things are better kept close and small. The house feels like a house again, quiet, imperfect, a place you sweep and cook in and sit with grief next to like an honest guest. There is pain, sure, and a long rawness that doesn't pretend to be healed. There is also a clear relief wrapped up in a complicated gratitude for a man who loved in the private way he knew how. I don't feel triumphant in a vengeful way. I feel solemn and steady. The final lesson wasn't about taking down a person. It was about honoring a protection he put in place so I could live without being erased. He told me to go make my own life many times in smaller ways, but what he did was more direct and kinder. He built a place for me ahead of time and left me the keys.